The street was still wet from the late afternoon rain, the kind that left the pavement shining like black glass under the soft amber of the streetlights. She walked quickly, arms wrapped around her torso, as if trying to hold herself together. No one paid attention to her. Not the couple arguing near the bus stop, not the man closing the shutters of his bakery, not the teenager biking past with headphones so loud she could hear the bass from meters away. People never looked. People never noticed. She had learned to move through the world like a ghost. Her breathing had been uneven for the past hour, but she kept telling herself it was fine. It always was. She would get home, take a shower, silence the tremor in her hands, and pretend that today had been just another day. But her vision was starting to blur around the edges, like fog creeping over a window. She blinked hard, willing the floating black dots to disappear. They didn't. The pavement felt like it was tilting under her feet, a slow rotation she couldn't stop. She reached the corner, a narrow intersection with a pharmacy on one side and an apartment building on the other. A place where nobody knew her name, a place where she could collapse, and the world would keep moving, because strangers have no obligation to care. She lifted a hand to steady herself against the cold brick wall, but her fingers barely grazed it before her knees buckled. The fall was silent. No scream, no plea, just a body giving up. Her cheek hit the pavement hard enough to make her gasp. The cold soothed the burning in her skin, the trembling in her muscles, the tight pressure in her chest. For a few seconds she didn't move. She didn't know if she could. Sound came back slowly. Cars passing, a distant siren, a dog barking somewhere behind her, and then footsteps. A male voice, startled but not panicked, said something she couldn't quite catch. Her hearing was muffled as if her ears were underwater. Another voice joined the first, a woman this time. "Is she breathing?" They lifted her gently, turning her on her back. Her eyelids flickered open and she saw blurry shapes leaning over her. She wanted to speak, to say she was fine, that she didn't want trouble, that she didn't need help, but no words came out. Her throat felt locked. Someone called an ambulance. Someone else placed a folded jacket under her head. A hand squeezed hers, warm and steady. "Stay with us, okay?" the man said. She tried to nod, but even that small movement sent a sharp, electric pain shooting through her ribs. The ambulance arrived fast, too fast. Paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, lifting her onto a stretcher, securing straps around her arms, her chest, her legs. The world tilted again as they loaded her into the back of the vehicle. A paramedic leaned over her, shining a small flashlight into her eyes. "What's your name?" a calm voice asked. She opened her lips, but the syllables fell apart before they formed. "That's okay," the paramedic said softly. "We'll figure it out." Her pulse was racing. She felt it in her throat, her temples, her fingertips. Her skin was too cold, then too hot. The siren started, loud, urgent, tearing through the quiet streets. They placed an oxygen mask over her nose and mouth. She inhaled mechanically, the plastic tasting like metal and antiseptic. She couldn't stop thinking about how empty her phone would look if they checked it. No recent calls, no messages waiting, no "on my way," no one to notify, no emergency contact, no one who would be surprised she wasn't home. She hated how normal that felt. The hospital lights were blinding when the ambulance doors opened. She squeezed her eyes shut as they rushed her inside, the wheels of the stretcher squeaking across the polished floor. Voices layered over each other, nurses asking questions, a doctor requesting labs, someone calling for a room. Everything moved fast except her thoughts, which lagged behind like heavy luggage dragged across a crowded station. A doctor approached as they transferred her to a bed. He wasn't rushed, he wasn't loud. His presence was strangely grounding, like a deep breath after hours of holding it in. He examined her vitals, his expression unreadable but attentive. His hands were warm, steady, almost impossibly gentle. "You collapsed in the street," he said. "Do you remember that?" She blinked once in response. Talking still felt impossible. "That's all right." He adjusted the IV line, checked her pulse again. His voice lowered just slightly, soft enough that only she could hear it. "You're safe now." "Safe?" The word echoed strangely inside her. She couldn't remember the last time she felt anything close to that. He stepped closer, eyes steady on hers. Not invasive, not demanding. just present in a way that made something in her chest loosen. Then he asked it, the question she wasn't prepared for, the one no one had ever asked her before. "Why isn't anyone here for you?" Her breath hitched. Something in her cracked open. She looked away, not because she was hiding, but because she didn't know how to meet the eyes of someone who finally noticed the truth she had spent years pretending didn't matter. In that sterile, fluorescent-lit room, surrounded by strangers and machines for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. She stared at the white ceiling, tracing invisible cracks that weren't really there, just to give her eyes something to hold on to. The doctor's question kept looping in her mind, like a broken record. Why isn't anyone here for you? A nurse adjusted her blanket and checked the monitor beside her. The rhythmic beeping felt like someone else's heartbeat. The nurse's badge read Marisol. She smiled in that practiced way that meant she had seen 100 people in this bed before, each with their own private disaster. "We're going to keep you for observation tonight, okay?" Marisol said. "Do you have someone we should call?" The question was casual, part of a checklist, but it still stung. Her throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but hesitation came first, pressing against her ribs like something physical. "I'm fine," she managed, the words hoarse. "No one to call." Marisol's eyes flickered just for a second, with something almost like pity. "All right," she said gently. "If you remember someone later, just let us know." No one to call. It sounded so final, spoken out loud, like a sentence she had written for herself long ago and forgotten until now. The doctor returned a few minutes later, holding a clipboard and a tablet. He had dark hair, a few strands already streaked with early grey, and faint, tired lines around his eyes that made him look more human, less distant. His name tag read, Dr. Lewis. "Heart rate is stabilizing," he said, more to the nurse than to her. "Blood pressure is still low, but better. Keep monitoring fluids." When he turned to her, his tone shifted again, that same quiet focus. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. "Lena," she whispered. "Lena," he repeated, as if testing how it felt in his mouth. "And your last name?" "Martins." "All right, Lena Martins." He tapped a few things on the tablet. "Do you have any medical conditions we should know about? Any diagnoses? Medication you take regularly?" She hesitated. There it was. That familiar impulse to minimize everything, to say it's nothing, to pretend her body hadn't been sending warnings for months. But the memory of the pavement under her cheek was still fresh. "I sometimes have these episodes," she said slowly. "Dizziness, shortness of breath, chest tightness. How long has that been going on?" She stared at her hands, tracing faint indentations on her fingers from the bag she'd been carrying when she collapsed. "A while." "A while as in days, weeks, months." She swallowed. "Maybe a year." He didn't scold her. He didn't raise his voice. He just exhaled a quiet breath, controlled like someone carefully folding a piece of paper. "And in that year," he asked, "have you talked to a doctor about it before?" She shook her head. "Why not?" The answer was so tangled she didn't know where to begin. Because she was always at work. Because you're not supposed to be fragile when people depend on you. Because appointments mean admitting that something is wrong. Because talking about fear makes it real. Because the last time she had tried to say, "I think something's wrong" to someone, they had used it against her. "I'm busy," she said instead. It felt small compared to the truth, but it was the only version she could give without unraveling. He studied her for a moment, not in a clinical way, in a way that suggested he was trying to connect dots that no one else had bothered to see. "Work?" he asked. She nodded. "What do you do?" "I'm an operations manager," she said automatically, "at a logistics company. Sounds like a lot of responsibility." "It is." "And you take care of yourself. Where in that list of responsibilities?" The corner of his mouth lifted just barely. Not quite a smile, but a softening. She opened her mouth, ready to say, "I'm fine" again, but the words tasted bitter now. The mask was heavy. She let the silence answer for her. He didn't push. "We'll run more tests tonight," he said. "Blood work, EKG, maybe imaging. For now, just rest. Your body is trying to tell you something. You should listen." He started to turn away, but then paused, as if remembering something half-finished. "And Lena," he added, "the question I asked you earlier, it wasn't meant to judge you." She blinked, pulled back into the moment. "What question?" "Why isn't anyone here for you?" he repeated, voice gentle. "I wasn't asking as a doctor. I was asking as a person standing in front of another person who just collapsed alone on a street. There was an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with blood pressure or oxygen levels. She swallowed hard. "People are busy," she murmured. "Everyone has their own life." "And you don't belong in any of those lives?" he asked softly. The truth slipped out before she could catch it. "I used to," she whispered. "Not anymore." He held her gaze for a long moment, like he was giving her space to take those words back. She didn't. He nodded just once. "Rest for now," he said. "We'll talk later." After he left, the room felt larger, not quieter. There was always a hum, machines and distant voices, but emptier. She looked at the chair in the corner, the one meant for someone waiting at a bedside. It sat there like an accusation. Her mind drifted backward, searching for a time when that chair wouldn't have been empty. Her mother's face flickered first, the sharp, tired eyes. The mouth always pulled tight in disapproval. "You can't afford to be weak, Lena," her mother used to say. "In this world, no one saves you. You stand up or you stay down." Weakness was not allowed. Illness was not allowed. Rest was not allowed. Tears were most definitely not allowed. She learned early that pain had to be swallowed, not presented. Later there had been someone else, a man who at first had insisted on walking her home when she worked late, who texted, "Are you eating?" and "Tell me when you get home." It had felt like safety for a while, until she realized it was surveillance dressed as concern. The first time she came home later than expected, his words had turned sharp. The first time she didn't answer her phone, he showed up at her job. "Do you know what it's like to worry about you?" he'd said, voice low, eyes dark. "I'm the only one who cares, Lena. Don't make me regret that." When he left, he didn't just take the illusion of safety. He took the little piece of her that believed she was worth anyone's concern. After that, being alone had seemed easier, cleaner. No expectations, no punishments, no one looking at their phone wondering why she hadn't called. And now here she was, lying in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm and dried rain on her hair, proving his words wrong in the most ironic way. Someone had worried, even if they were a stranger who'd happened to be walking by when she fell. Someone had called an ambulance. Someone had placed a jacket under her head so it wouldn't rest on cold concrete. It wasn't that no one cared at all, she realized. It was that she had built a life where no one was close enough to notice first. A nurse came in to draw blood. Lena watched the vials fill one by one, dark red spirals marking the plastic. Proof that something was moving inside her, even when everything felt numb. "Do you want something for the anxiety?" the nurse asked gently when she saw the tension in Lena's jaw. Lena hesitated. "Is it that obvious?" The nurse offered a kind smile. "You're gripping the bedsheet like it's going to run away." She hadn't even noticed. She loosened her fingers slowly. "Maybe. Something light," she admitted. "Of course." When the nurse left, Lena's gaze drifted again to the empty chair. In her head, she tried to picture someone sitting there. A friend from work, an old neighbor, a relative she hadn't spoken to in years. Each image flickered and vanished like a projection on a curtain. Behind her exhaustion, behind the physical collapse, there was a quiet, deeper question forming, one that had nothing to do with medical tests or diagnoses. When had she decided that needing someone was more dangerous than collapsing alone in the street? She closed her eyes not to sleep, but to escape the brightness of the room. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she heard again the doctor's voice, low and steady. "Why isn't anyone here for you?" She didn't know it yet, but that question wouldn't leave her alone. It would follow her through the night, through the tests, through the hours between the beep of machines and the soft footsteps in the corridor. It would linger in every silence until, eventually, she would be forced to answer it. Not with words, but with the secrets she had buried so deep, even she pretended they weren't there. She woke to the sound of wheels rolling somewhere down the hall, a gurney being pushed, the quiet rush of night shift urgency. The room was dimmer now, the overhead lights switched off, leaving only a soft glow from the wall lamp and the faint illumination from the monitors. Her body felt heavy, like she was sinking into the mattress. The air smelled like disinfectant and something metallic, a sterile calm that made everything feel suspended in time. A different nurse stepped in, carrying a chart. "You're awake," she whispered, as though raising her voice might shatter something fragile. Her badge read K. Nguyen. She checked the IV line and the monitors, writing down numbers with practiced precision. "We got the first round of labs," she said quietly. "Doctor will go over them with you." Lena nodded, even though her head ached with the effort. Her hands felt cold. Her lips were dry. She could still taste the plastic of the oxygen mask, though they'd removed it earlier. "Do you feel dizzy now?" the nurse asked. "A little." "We'll keep monitoring." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "If you need anything, literally anything, press the button by your bed. Don't wait until it gets worse." Wait until it gets worse. That was the story of her life. She gave a small nod, though she wasn't sure the nurse believed she would ever press that button. When the nurse left, the silence settled like a blanket. Not comforting, just present. She stared at the ceiling again. The question had returned, ghost-like, whispering at the edges of her thoughts. Why isn't anyone here for you? She wanted to ignore it, drown it out with the hum of machines, but it clung to her like a second skin. A soft knock pulled her attention to the door. Dr. Lewis stepped inside, holding her results. His expression was calm, but not indifferent. He sat in the chair beside her bed, the same empty one that had bothered her earlier. Seeing someone in it sent a strange ripple through her, like a window cracking under pressure. "Lena," he said softly, "your labs came back." Her pulse quickened. Not because she expected bad news, but because her body had been conditioned to brace for impact whenever someone prepared to tell her something important. "Your electrolytes are low. You're dehydrated. Your blood pressure dropped sharply before you collapsed." He looked up from the tablet, meeting her eyes. "But that's not the whole story." She stiffened. "What do you mean?" "You're exhausted," he said plainly. "Physically, emotionally, probably both. Your cortisol levels are elevated. Your glucose is unstable. You haven't been eating properly, and your body is showing signs of prolonged stress." She stared at him, confusion and shame mixing in a way that made her chest tighten. "I didn't notice," she whispered. He studied her, really studied her for a moment. Then he set the tablet aside, leaning forward slightly. "Lena, bodies don't collapse out of nowhere. They warn us first, over and over, until they can't anymore." She swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought I could handle it." "You've been handling everything alone for too long," he said, not accusingly, but with a softness that made the words hit deeper. "That kind of strength has a breaking point." Her throat burned. She looked away. He let the silence breathe for a moment before asking, "Has anything been happening recently? Anything that might have triggered this?" She hesitated. How could she explain that nothing had happened recently, because everything had already happened years ago, that the leftover damage simply lived inside her like a dormant fault line? "I've been overwhelmed," she said eventually. "Work, bills, things piling up." "And outside of work?" he asked. Her eyes flickered. "Not much outside of work." "Friends?" She gave a hollow smile. "I think I forgot how to make those." "Family?" Her silence was answer enough. He didn't pry, but he didn't back away either. "You're carrying too much," he said gently, "and you're carrying it alone." She hated how true it sounded. She hated that a stranger could say it with more clarity than anyone who had ever known her. He leaned back slightly, giving her space again. "We'll keep you overnight, maybe until tomorrow evening. We need to stabilize your vitals and run a few more tests." She nodded numbly. She felt both relieved and trapped. Relieved that someone was taking control. Trapped because she was too used to being the one who kept everything together. "Do you want me to contact anyone for you?" he asked. "Employer, friend, neighbor?" "No," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "Please, no." He didn't argue. He didn't tell her she needed support. His eyes softened, but his voice stayed steady. "All right, no calls." A strange pressure grew in her chest. Gratitude mixed with dread. A complicated knot she couldn't untangle. He stood, but before leaving, he paused at the foot of the bed. "Lena," he said quietly, "there's strength in asking for help. It's not a weakness." The words scraped something raw inside her. She looked at him, and for a moment she wasn't the woman who collapsed on the street or the operations manager who held everything together. She was just someone tired, someone trying, someone human. When he left, the air felt different. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly, trying to anchor herself. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Her mind drifted back to her apartment, unlit, silent, waiting for her with the same indifference it always had. No footsteps pacing, no mug left on the counter by someone else, no "where are you" messages, no expectations, but also no warmth. The beeping of her heart monitor slowed gradually. the first sign that the sedative was working. Her eyelids grew heavy. She let herself drift because, for once, falling asleep didn't feel like giving up. It felt like surrendering to the fact that she didn't have to pretend in this room. Not tonight. As she faded into sleep, the last thought that hovered in her mind was neither fear nor guilt, but a quiet, unfamiliar question. What would it feel like if someone actually stayed? She woke before dawn, not because someone called her name, but because the hospital had its own rhythm, a distant clatter of carts, the whisper of nurses exchanging shifts, the soft hum of fluorescent lights warming back to full brightness. Her body felt lighter, though the weight behind her ribs remained. Her throat was dry, but her mind was clearer than it had been in weeks, maybe months. A thin stream of early morning light slipped between the blinds, painting a pale stripe across her blanket. For a moment she simply stared at it, feeling an odd quiet inside herself, like her thoughts were finally speaking in a normal volume instead of shouting. A nurse entered with gentle footsteps. "Good morning, Lena," she said with a soft smile. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Lena whispered. And it was true, even if she couldn't define what better meant. "We're going to run a second set of vitals. Then the doctor will come in to talk to you." The nurse wrapped a blood pressure cuff around her arm. "Did you rest?" "As much as I could." When the nurse left, Lena sat up a little straighter. A slow ache spread through her muscles, the kind that came after a long cry, even though she hadn't cried. Not outwardly, but her body felt like it had. She wondered what time it was. If the world outside already had people rushing to work, making coffee, answering emails. She wondered how many of them would miss her if she didn't show up today. Her boss would notice, but not because of concern, because she still had 3 reports to finish and a vendor meeting scheduled. But personal concern, that didn't exist for her in that building. She had become efficient, not connected. Reliable, not memorable. She heard footsteps again, these slower, familiar. Dr. Lewis pushed the door open, holding a tablet and 2 printed pages. His hair was slightly messier, like he had run a hand through it one too many times. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning." He sat at the foot of her bed, not taking the chair yet. It felt intentional, as though he didn't want to crowd her. "How's your chest?" he asked. "Tight," she admitted, "but less than yesterday." "Good." He handed her a cup of water. "Small sips." She drank, the coolness settling gently behind her sternum. When she lowered the cup, he took the chair again, placing the tablet on his knee. "I want to go over your tests," he said. "You're not in immediate danger, but we need to take this seriously." She tensed. He waited until she met his eyes before continuing. "You had a vasovagal syncope. Basically, your blood pressure dropped drastically, and your body couldn't compensate. That's why you collapsed. But that isn't the root problem." She breathed slowly. "Then what is?" "Stress," he said calmly. "Chronic, prolonged stress. Malnourishment, dehydration, sleep deprivation. Your body has been functioning on empty, and it finally forced you to stop." Lena closed her eyes. She had known it in pieces, never as a whole. Stress didn't sound dramatic enough for the way her collapse had felt, but the longer she thought about it, the more she recognized herself in every symptom he listed. "I'm scheduling you for a follow-up with our internal medicine department," he continued. "But what you need isn't only medical, you need support." That word again, support. Her jaw tightened instinctively. "I'm fine on my own," she said, the lie automatic. He didn't flinch, didn't challenge her directly. "Maybe," he said, "but being alone and being unsupported aren't the same thing." The sentence landed heavily. She looked down at her hands, thumb tracing the edge of her hospital bracelet. "I don't have anyone," she said softly, surprising herself with the admission. "Not really, not outside of work. Work isn't the same as having people," he said gently. "And even if you don't have someone now, that doesn't mean you're meant to go through everything alone." "I'm used to it," she whispered. "I can tell," he replied. It wasn't judgment, it was observation. That made it worse somehow, easier to believe. He set the tablet aside and leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Lena, what happened to you?" Her heart stumbled. The question was too big, too heavy, too tangled. She shook her head because she didn't know where to start, or if she could start. He didn't push. "You don't have to tell me today," he said quietly. "Or ever, but keeping it locked inside is hurting you more than whatever happened." His voice was steady, warm but not indulgent. a voice trained to break through denial without breaking the person carrying it. She closed her eyes again, feeling heat behind them. Not tears, but the beginning of something dangerously close. He noticed but didn't comment. "I'm going to prescribe rest for at least 3 days," he said. "You need to let your nervous system recover." She almost laughed. Rest. The one thing she had never allowed herself. "I can't take 3 days off," she murmured. "They need me at work." He tilted his head, eyes softening. "And if you collapse again, what will they do then?" She had no answer. He continued, still gentle but unwavering. "Your body isn't asking for a break, Lena. It's begging for one." A deep breath escaped her, shaky and uneven. "I don't know how to slow down," she admitted. "That's okay," he said. "You'll learn." Silence settled between them, lighter this time. Not empty, just quiet. He stood slowly, smoothing the edge of his coat. "I'll come check on you in a few hours. For now, try to let yourself just exist. No expectations, no responsibilities." She nodded faintly. He took one step toward the door, then paused, looking back at her. "And Lena?" She lifted her gaze. "Just because no one is here now," he said softly, "doesn't mean no one ever will be." He left before she could respond. The door closed gently behind him, leaving her alone with the soft hum of machines and the faint warmth of his words lingering in the air. For the first time, the empty chair didn't feel like a reminder of what she lacked. It felt like an invitation for something she'd never allowed herself to imagine, and that scared her more than collapsing ever had. The morning unfolded slowly, the kind of slow that made time feel thick. Nurses came and went with gentle efficiency, checking monitors, adjusting her IV fluids, asking how she was feeling in the tone one uses for someone who might fall apart if pressed too hard. Lena drifted between wakefulness and a strange, suspended calm. Her body felt heavy, but the heaviness was different now. Not collapse, not panic. More like her muscles were waking up after realizing they didn't have to stay clenched anymore. Around mid-morning, a volunteer wheeled in a cart with books, puzzle magazines, and a basket of small comfort items, lotion packets, tissues, lip balm. The volunteer, an older woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, paused at Lena's door. "Would you like something to pass the time?" she asked softly. Lena blinked. She didn't remember the last time someone had offered her anything without expecting something in return. "I'm not sure," she said. The woman smiled warmly. "That's all right." She picked a small tube of lotion from the basket and set it on the tray beside Lena's bed. "Even strong people deserve to feel cared for, dear." Lena's breath caught, and before she could answer, the woman shuffled quietly away. The lotion sat there like a foreign object, an act of kindness she didn't know how to accept. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed on the bedside table where someone had placed it the night before. She stared at it long enough for the screen to light up again. No messages, no missed calls, just calendar alerts and automated reminders. Her chest tightened, not sharply, just a dull pressure. Proof that the world kept turning without her exactly as she'd expected. She turned the phone face down and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, Dr. Lewis was standing by the doorway, reviewing something on his tablet. He glanced up with that same attentive focus she was starting to recognize. "How's your morning?" he asked as he stepped inside. "Quiet," she said, "still tired." "That's expected." He pulled the chair closer, sitting beside her. "Your blood pressure is improving. Your ECG looks stable. If everything stays consistent, you might be able to go home tomorrow." The idea of going home felt strangely heavy. He seemed to sense it. "How do you feel about that?" he asked. She hesitated. "I don't know." "No rush," he said. "You can take more time if needed." He checked her IV, then the chart hanging at the foot of the bed, his movements calm and precise. When he finished, he looked at her again, this time without the tablet or the charts, just his full attention. "Lena, earlier you said you don't have anyone outside of work. Have you felt this alone for a long time?" The question landed softly, but it still broke something open inside her. She tucked her hands under the blanket, instinctively trying to shrink. "It's easier this way," she said. "Easier doesn't mean healthier." "I know." "Do you?" he asked gently. Her breath trembled. "If I let people get close, they leave, or they hurt me, or they expect something I can't give. Or," he said softly, "they stay." Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with something raw, something buried too long. She felt exposed in a way she hadn't expected. He didn't push, didn't ask her to explain. Instead, he shifted the conversation. "I want to talk about what happens after you leave here," he said. "Your collapse wasn't a random event, it was a warning. You can't go back to living exactly the same way." She nodded faintly. "You need rest, a real break, and you need to start rebuilding your life so you're not carrying everything alone." "How?" she whispered. "One step at a time." He tapped his pen lightly against the chart. "Therapy if you're open to it, a better sleep cycle, regular meals, more water, scheduled rest, and finding connection." The word made her shoulders tense again. "I'm not good at that," she said. "No one is at first," he replied. "Connection is a skill, and like any skill you learn it by trying." "Trying means risking things," she murmured. "The living always does." His voice softened. "But not trying is a different kind of risk, the one that brought you here." She let the words settle. For once she didn't try to argue with them. He stood to leave, but his tone remained gentle. "I'll be back to check on you in a few hours. Rest and try to breathe a little slower." "Okay," she said quietly. The room felt different after he left. Not empty, just quieter, more honest. She stared at the ceiling again, tracing the dull glow of the morning light. The tightness in her chest had eased, but a hollow ache lingered. Connection, support, rest. They all sounded like vocabulary from someone else's life, not hers. But as the hours passed, a strange thought kept nudging at her, persistent and unwelcome. Maybe she wasn't collapsing because she was weak. Maybe she was collapsing because she had tried to be too strong for too long. And maybe, just maybe, there was someone in the next room who saw that strength in a way she never had. The afternoon light softened into a muted gold that filtered through the blinds and stretched quietly across the room. Lena rested on her side, curled slightly, one hand tucked beneath her cheek. Her body felt like a fragile machine running on limited power, functional but at risk of shutting down if pushed too hard. The hum of the hospital blended with her thoughts, the faint roll of carts, footsteps passing, low voices outside her door. Everything felt distant, like she was observing the world from behind glass. A nurse entered to check her vitals again, wrapping the cuff around her arm with careful hands. "Numbers are looking better," she said with a gentle nod. "Your fluid levels are stabilizing. You're responding well." Lena nodded, unsure how to respond. She was grateful, but gratitude felt tangled with embarrassment. She had let things go too far. Everyone here knew it, even if they didn't say it outright. As the nurse left, Lena stared at the IV pole beside her. The steady drip felt like a metaphor for her life, a slow, controlled release, measured and monitored, because she had lost the ability to regulate anything on her own. A soft knock came at the door. She looked up as Dr. Lewis stepped inside, holding a small stack of papers and a calm expression. His presence filled the room without overwhelming it, as though he carried a quiet steadiness wherever he went. "Hey," he said softly, "mind if I come in?" She shook her head. He took his usual seat, watching her for a moment before speaking again. "You look better than this morning." "Do I?" Her voice was faint, almost disbelieving. "You do." He glanced at her chart. "Your vitals are stabilizing, you're breathing easier, that's progress." Progress. The word felt strange in her mind, like a door someone else had unlocked. He placed the papers on the small table beside her bed. "I reviewed your stress markers again. They're still high, but trending in the right direction." Her fingers twisted slightly in the blanket. "I didn't realize stress could do this." "It can," he said. "Stress is one of the few things the body can't outrun. It waits, it accumulates, and eventually it demands attention." She looked away, eyelids lowering. "I should have known." "No," he said calmly. "You shouldn't have. You weren't trained to listen to your own needs. You were trained to endure them." She felt something tighten in her chest at those words. Not pain, but recognition. He continued, "I've seen people collapse from pushing their limits. Soldiers, single parents, caretakers, executives, students. People who everyone thinks are strong because they never complain." Her breath caught slightly. "And then they fall apart?" "They don't fall apart," he corrected gently. "They break open, and sometimes that's what leads them to start healing." She swallowed, her throat dry. No one had ever talked to her like this, not with such steady conviction, not with such understanding. He shifted slightly in the chair. "Lena, can I ask you something?" His tone made it clear she could say no. She nodded cautiously. "When was the last time someone took care of you?" The question pierced through her like a thin blade. Sharp, precise, honest. Her eyes flickered away from his toward the window, toward anywhere but the intensity of that moment. "I don't remember," she whispered. "Think," he said softly. She did. She searched. Childhood? No. Her mother had cared in ways that looked more like pressure than love. Her teenage years? She had learned independence too young. Her 20s? She had been in that relationship, the one that looked protective until it turned controlling. After that? Nothing. No one. She had built her life around self-reliance, mistaking isolation for strength. She exhaled shakily. "It's been years." He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that answer. "And yet you still expect yourself to keep going without pause, without rest, without anyone." She blinked hard. "People don't stay." "Some don't," he acknowledged, "but that doesn't mean everyone won't." She clenched her jaw, suddenly overwhelmed by the idea of someone staying. The chair in the corner drew her gaze again. She imagined someone sitting there, not out of obligation, not out of duty, but out of care. The image felt impossible. "I don't know how to let people in," she murmured. "You don't have to let everyone in," he said. "You just have to stop locking yourself out." The words made her chest tighten in a different way. She felt exposed, as if he had seen through every practiced mask she had spent years perfecting. He noticed her trembling hands and softened his voice further. "You survived things that taught you to be alone, Lena. But surviving isn't the same as living." Her breath quivered. "I don't know how to fix any of that." "You're not meant to fix it alone," he replied. "Healing isn't a solo assignment." Her eyes lifted to meet his, cautiously, vulnerably. He held her gaze without judgment, just presence. Something inside her shifted, unsettling and unfamiliar. It felt like a crack forming in the wall she had built, a thin line of light slipping through. Suddenly her chest tightened again, not from panic but from a wave of emotion rising too fast. Her eyes stung. She inhaled sharply and looked away, blinking. Tears didn't come, but the pressure behind them was unmistakable. He saw it. He didn't comment. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small packet of tissues, placing it gently on the blanket near her hand. She stared at it, her throat tightening further. Such a simple gesture, such a human one. "I'm not here to force anything out of you," he said. "I just want you to know you're not invisible." Her breath hitched. Invisible. That was exactly how she had felt for so long, moving through days like a shadow, unnoticed unless she was needed for something. He stood slowly, giving her space again. "I'll come back later, try to rest." She nodded faintly. He reached the door before she spoke again, her voice soft but unsteady. "Why do you care?" she asked. He turned, his expression calm but sincere. "Because you deserve someone to." Her breath trembled. She didn't know how to respond. He left quietly, closing the door behind him with a soft click. For a long moment, she simply lay there, staring at the tissues he'd left. She brushed her fingers lightly against the packet. The contact, gentle as it was, broke the remaining dam inside her. Tears didn't rush. They slid slowly, silently, leaving faint, warm trails across her cheeks. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't fear, it was relief. Relief that someone had looked at her and seen more than her collapse. Relief that someone had stayed long enough to offer presence, not pity. She cried quietly, barely moving, letting the tears soak into the blanket, letting her body release what it had held too tightly for too long. And though she didn't know it yet, this was the beginning of something, not love, not romance, not anything immediate or dramatic. Just the first crack in a lifelong isolation. The first sign that maybe she wasn't meant to survive the world alone. She stayed awake longer than she meant to, the soft hum of machines becoming a kind of lullaby she couldn't fully surrender to. Her eyes felt heavy, but her mind moved quietly, no longer racing, but unfolding, like pages she hadn't read in years. There was a strange calm in the room, the kind that came not from certainty but from finally stopping long enough to feel the truth she'd been running from. She knew she was healing. Not fully, not dramatically, but in the small ways that mattered. The ache in her chest had softened into something else. Not comfort, not exactly. More like space. Space to feel, space to breathe, space to exist without bracing for the next blow. The afternoon sun shifted, casting a pale warmth across her legs. She traced the edge of the blanket with her fingertips, letting the texture ground her. She wasn't used to stillness. She wasn't used to being in a place where other people paid attention to her well-being. It felt unfamiliar, a little frightening, but also safe. A soft knock stirred the quiet. Dr. Lewis opened the door with the same gentle presence he always carried. He held a small clipboard in one hand, but his expression wasn't clinical. It was attentive, steady, almost warm. "Hi," he said softly. She swallowed, voice slightly hoarse. "Hi." He stepped inside and set the clipboard on the table, choosing to sit in the chair near her bed again. The chair that had been empty for so long, and somehow didn't feel empty at all anymore. "How are you feeling now?" he asked. She breathed in slowly. "Different. Good different or bad different?" She considered the question, turning it over in her mind. "Real," she said finally. "I think I've been avoiding reality for a long time." He nodded as if he understood completely. "Sometimes we survive by ignoring the weight, but eventually the weight insists." She looked down at her hands. "You asked me earlier why I was alone. I keep thinking about that." "Only answer if you want to," he said gently. She hesitated. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because saying it out loud made it true in a way thinking it never had. "I kept people out," she whispered. "Not on purpose, just slowly. One boundary, one silence, one I'm fine at a time. And then one day I realized there was no one left who knew anything real about me." He didn't fill the silence, he let her speak. "I thought if no one saw me, no one could hurt me. But being invisible started to hurt just as much." Her voice cracked at the end. She looked away, embarrassed. But he didn't let the moment turn into shame. "There's courage in seeing yourself clearly," he said, "and even more in letting yourself be seen." She let the words settle. They didn't sting, they settled like warm water. He leaned forward a little. "I want you to know something, Lena. What happened to you isn't a failure, it's a signal, a chance to start again, differently." She felt tears rise. Not fast, just enough to blur her vision. "I don't know how to start again." "You don't have to know," he said softly. "You just have to not run from it." Her breath trembled. "It feels like too much." "I know," he murmured, "but you won't be doing it alone this time." She blinked, startled by the unexpected warmth in his voice. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "that you'll have a medical team supporting you. Therapists who can help you carry the emotional parts. And—" He paused, holding her gaze with an honesty that felt almost intimate. "It means that while you're here, you have me. You don't have to pretend you're fine." Something inside her gave way, quietly, gently. Not a collapse, not a break. A soft unfastening, like a knot finally loosening. She exhaled shakily. "I don't remember the last time someone said that to me." He offered a small, sincere smile. "Then it's overdue." A silence fell between them, not heavy but full. A silence that felt like breathing space. "You'll be discharged tomorrow," he said eventually. "We'll set up follow-up appointments and give you clear instructions for recovery." She nodded slowly. "Okay." "And when you go home, He hesitated, as if choosing his words with care. "I want you to try something new, something small, something that opens a door." Her eyes softened. "Like what?" "Like telling someone the truth," he said gently. "Just one truth, it doesn't have to be everything. Just enough to keep the door from closing again." She didn't answer right away, but something in her shifted. A quiet acceptance, tentative but real. He stood but didn't step away immediately. "Lena?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you're still here." She felt the words move through her like a warm tide. Not romantic, not scripted, just deeply human. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with sincerity she couldn't hide. He nodded once, gently, and then stepped out of the room, leaving the door slightly open. The moment he disappeared, she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She looked at the empty chair again, but this time it didn't feel like a symbol of absence. It felt like proof that someone had been there, that someone had chosen to sit with her, that someone had noticed. As the room quieted, she placed her hand over her heart, feeling it beat. Slowly, steadily, not perfect but alive. For the first time in years, she realized the truth she had spent so long denying. She wasn't meant to be invisible. She wasn't meant to collapse alone. She wasn't meant to disappear quietly into her own exhaustion. She was meant to return. And tomorrow, when she walked out of this hospital, she would carry something with her that she had never allowed herself before. The possibility of being seen,